Les is grumpy today. He doesn't want to be in front of the camera anymore. He's, you know.
I didn't sleep good last night.
Oh, so you got like bags under your eyes or something?
No, I was tossing and turning.
Why was that? What are you worried about?
Oh, everything.
Everything. Anyway, day 11 today, Les, on this project. It's Easter Monday. So at least we had a good lunch today. Les actually got a nice beef dip sandwich with fries. So that's more like it, Les.
Yeah,
none of this healthy salad stuff.
No, that's why he's such an athlete.
It's a manly lunch. Anyway, got a quick question for you. I had a viewer ask where you were born, because you mentioned that you were from the UK yesterday. I can't exactly remember how you brought that into the conversation. It's something about having a thick skin, and you were born in the UK, blah, blah, blah.
Scousagro, tell him.
Well, you tell him, Les.
Scousagro.
Okay. I have no idea where that is. You want to tell me where that is?
If they don't know what Scousagro is, they'll never know where I came from.
What about all the other viewers, Les, who might want a little bit more information than that?
LFC.
Was that Liverpool?
Liverpool. Formby, Liverpool.
Okay, so there you go.
Formby, Liverpool.
So that's why you know, or how you know.
Maskinette.
Really? Well, you're getting there, Les.
I was a boot boy.
Yeah. All right, so we'll get back to the project after Les has finished his.
You know Yazzie Hughes? I'm Yazzie Hughes' cousin.
I have no idea who that is.
It's a TV show.
Oh, okay. I'll look it up. I'll look it up when I get home.
Yeah.
We'll watch it tonight.
Yazzie Hughes.
All right, finish your coffee. Just sitting at the driver's side front, and Les and I were just having a little chat about how we want to progress on this front end. And I think what we're going to do first, as I mentioned to Les, I think we're going to get rid of this hub and rotor assembly off the front. So that'll be the first thing we do. Then I want to detach the steering rack, so we'll look at doing that probably second. Then I want to concentrate on removing the spring, so we'll do that third. Then I want to concentrate on removing the entire, I think what we'll do, as I mentioned to Les, there's a number of ways of getting the rest of the suspension components off. The bottom control arms and the upper control arms, there's a number of ways to take this off the car. I think on the driver's side, just for Les to have an example of the entire unit, I'll probably just take this unit entirely off the car in one piece once we get the spring out. And maybe on the passenger side, we'll break it down into its components. We'll separate the ball joint, take off the upper control arm, and then we'll take off the lower control arms, separate that from the vertical link, etc. And I'll bring you guys along and show you a bit more about the parts of this car as we go. So I think that's it. We're just about getting ready to work. So again, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pop this front hub and brake rotor off, and we'll bring it back in a second. Okay, so Les has removed the rotor and hub assembly. We just done a really quick check of the outer bearing, and it looks pretty good actually, but obviously they need to be cleaned. I was saying to Les, cleaned and repacked when we go to reassemble, but we're just kind of taking an overall evaluation of the parts as we take them off. There's a little bit of scoring here on the stub axle, so we're going to have a little better look at that. I was telling Les we need to look for any rust pitting, any scoring or any bluing, which would indicate some heat. So anyway, we'll continue on here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect this, as I mentioned, we're going to disconnect the steering rack from the steering arm, and then we'll go from there. I'll bring you back. Okay, I've got, Les has taken the nut off the bottom of the steering rack, or tie rod end if you want to call it. He's going to take the dust shield off. It just makes it a little bit better access. So we're going to take the dust shield off. Already one of the fasteners is off. We're taking the second one off, and then we'll remove that. and then we'll move along and we'll talk about a couple of different tools. Okay, so we're going to separate the steering rack from the steering lever and that tie rod end. So we've got a couple of choices of tools. We could use what they call a pickle fork, which you basically bash on. That would probably be good for Les. He likes bashing on stuff. But we're going to use this separator. I like working in this a little bit better. So we'll get this attached, or I'll show Les how to use this, and we'll crack that tie rod end off, and then we'll move forward.
What size is this, Dave, this wrench?
I don't know off the top of my head. One of my grandfather's wrenches.
It says 15/16.
Okay. So I just scared the crap out of Les. So we were going back and forth between the pickle fork and this tool here, and we actually eventually used this tool to get it off, but it was stubborn. I don't know if this is the original tie rod end, but it was really in that taper. So eventually it came off, but as per usual, well, for most of them, came off with quite a bang. So anyway, it's off, so we're happy. So we'll move on to the next thing, which is going to get that coil spring out. So that's off. I think what the first thing we'll do before we get to putting the compressor in is I'm going to get Les to take off this sway bar mount here. So we'll get Les to buzz this off and get that out of the way before we put the spring compressor tool in, and we'll bring you back then. All right, guys, now the dangerous part of this operation. And so we've got our internal spring compressor tool, basically a big piece of threaded rod. It's got a little safety pin on the end here, a little plate, a couple lock nuts on top, big washers. That fits down in between the coil spring and the top of the suspension turret. So I'm going to assemble that now, and we'll bring you back. Okay, just explaining to Les how this tool works. Give me this trouble light, please. So we've got the rod in. There's that plate on the bottom, which Les is going to put between the four fixing points for the shock. There are plates on the bottom that actually pick up those 4 points, but mine does not. It's just actually a straight plate. So what we're planning on doing is, and I was just explaining this to Les, so what we're going to do is we're going to compress the spring, which will bring up this lower control arm, and attached to the lower control arm is the spring plate, the plate which the spring fits into. There's a pocket there for the spring. So we're going to bring this up, compress the spring. We're going to release these 6 fasteners that will release the bottom of the plate on the bottom of the control arm. Then we're going to reduce the slack off of the spring compressor, and as we do that, it's going to push the plate off the bottom of the control arm until we've got no tension or no energy left in the spring. So that's the purpose of using this internal spring compressor, just to get the spring out. So we're going to go ahead and do that now carefully. You need a wrench on the top to stop this from spinning out, and Les is going to get a wrench on the bottom and start cranking from the bottom. So be back in a minute. All right, so Les is working on that bottom bolt, compressing that spring, and we're going to bring it up so we can get to these 2 back studs. There's 2 nuts on these studs at the back, so we want to basically clear it, bring it up enough so we can get a wrench on those 2 studs and 2 nuts at the back. So Les is just going to keep cranking. It's not the easiest thing to do while under the car. It's better to have a hoist if possible, but we'll make do with what we got. Okay, so all 6 bolts are out of the spring pan. So Les is going to start loosening that bottom spring compressor off. And as he does that, the lower control arm will drop and it'll release the pressure off of that coil spring. As I was saying to Les, you kind of have to watch as you're lowering the spring pan, because the back corners, particularly the inside corner or the front corner, likes to hang up on the frame a little bit. So you just got to keep sort of keeping an eye on that and pulling it forward if it starts to lock up on the frame as you lower that compressor. All right, you can see that the spring plate is now detached from that lower control arm. So Les is just finishing it off, and we're going to I think that's all the tension off the spring now. I'm going to undo, Les can probably stop now, undo the 2 lock nuts from the top here, and we'll just drop that right out the bottom. So I could probably do that while you're here. Les holds on to that spring plate. I'll just get rid of these two lock nuts. We'll do this real time. Look at this. This is going to be too long a process. Yeah, it's still turning the...
Hold on.
We'll come back. We'll.
I got it.
Okay, we'll come back. I'll get this loosened off a bit and we'll come back. All right, so just finish this off. It's going to come down in a couple seconds less. Okay, it's all you, Les. So hold on to that spring pan, and the coil is going to fall as well.
Hold on, brother.
Okay, now pull the coil spring out. There you go. There you go, Les. So you now safely removed coil spring from the front suspension.
Fuck.
All right, no swearing, Les. We'll come back in a minute. All right, so now that the coil spring is off, now we have to make a decision what we want to do as far as removing the rest of the suspension components, the lower and upper control arms. So as I'd mentioned, I think in the previous video, I think what we're going to do, so Les has an idea of how this all goes together, I think we're going to take this apart as one unit off of this side. So that will entail us undoing these bolts here and undoing the top bolts here at this upper fulcrum piece, and then we'll remove the unit as a whole. When we get to the other side, we'll probably show you how to do it by releasing the ball joint. For example, if you wanted to just change your bushings up here or change your ball joint, you can actually use a spring compressor tool and release this vertical link here at the ball joint to work on the upper without having to worry about the lower. As long as the coil spring is under pressure with the tool, you can actually do some work up in this area if you need to. Anyway, once Les gets back, he's just out picking some stuff up. We'll get to removing that entire front suspension as one piece. We'll be back. All right, while Les was away, I just took the sway bar off the front. No big deal, just basically 4 bolts to get that off out of the way. It was just being sort of a pain and being in the way when Les was working under the car, so I've just removed that from where it's located on the radiator protection shield. So that's off the car. So now we're going to continue on removing the rest of this suspension bit from the driver's side. So I'll just get Les set back up and we'll start taking some bolts off. So just going over the plan with Les. So these are the lower control arm pickup points on the frame. And on the back of the frame there are 2 nuts that hold this bracket on. And the key thing to remember here, and I don't know if you can see them there are also shims here to work on your alignment for the front. So the same thing as I mentioned for the rear, you're going to keep track of what shims are in the front and rear pickup points on the frame. So what I'll get Les to do is I'll get him to go underneath the car and we'll get him to buzz out those 2 fasteners on the front and rear. So you've got one here on the, so 2 bolts on the rear of the control arm, and then you've got the other control arm is just up here. It's underneath the steering rack, but just in here there's also another pickup point where there's another 2 nuts on the inside of the frame with, again, possibly some shims or possibly not. It doesn't even look like there's any shims on that point. So anyway, we'll get to the bottom of it in just a minute. Okay, so Les has got the 4 nuts from the inside studs undone, so he's going to carefully grab a hold of that bottom A-arm, control arm, and he's going to pull that away from the frame. Again, he's going to try to keep note of the shims that are there on the back of those brackets so we don't lose them. So pull that out gently, Les, and lower to the ground. That was just a washer. Yeah. How many shims you got there? You can grab them and pull them out if you want, Les.
Well, they've fallen on their sides, so there's 2 here.
Okay, so just put them there on the frame.
Okay. So
somewhere.
This is this side.
So that's the back,
side.
let's say the rear. And is there any on the front? I don't think there was any on the front. Doesn't look like it. Maybe
Can't
one?
see them, Dave.
All right, so pull that out, Les. Keep coming out and put it down on the ground. Okay? Now let it down. There you go.
This doesn't bend, does it?
It does. There you go.
Stiff.
Okay, so just let it sit there. All right. So that's why we specifically did the bottom first, so we could hang it actually from the upper fulcrum pin.
Yeah, there's nothing in this.
So no shim on the front.
No, buddy.
All right, so let's move on to the next step. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, Les is probably going to get a socket, it'll be easier. We're going to remove this upper fulcrum pin. I just wanted to give you a reference on how this actually looks, because a lot of people actually put this in backwards. It could actually be spun around and installed the other way, which screws up the camber caster. Can't remember which one, but it screws that up. So just always reference this picture so you know that the actual fulcrum goes this way. So we're going to remove that. That'll allow us to remove this entire front suspension component. Okay, we're on the last fulcrum bolt, so Les has got a good hand on that, so we'll get this thing going here and we'll just take that right off, Les. All right, so just go put that on the floor, Les, and we'll have a little chat about it. Okay, so there's one way of getting the front suspension off. So I've assigned the task of removing the fan from Les. Les, you're doing the inner bolts, not the outer bolts. The inners, yeah. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about the front suspension. So we have the steering arm, or the steering knuckle, if you want to call it. Here's the spindle. This is the caliper mounting plate. You can see that's actually got lock tabs in here as well, so don't forget the lock tabs when you're reassembling. So you have the lower control arms on the bottom, obviously. There's the brackets that go into the frame. Okay, got to check these obviously for cracks, that kind of thing, for any kind of wear. Obviously all this needs to be rebushed. Here's the ball joint up here. Okay, this is called the vertical link. All right, this is called down here, it's pretty hard to see, this nice little brass piece which is covered in crap. This is called the trunnion down the bottom. At the very back here, down here, this is called the steering stop lock. It's a little eccentric piece that limits the steering travel. And what else we got? Fulcrum pin, I think I mentioned already up here. We've got upper bushings up here with castle nuts and cotter pins. Ball joint, as I'd mentioned. Two bolts that hold the ball joint in. Vertical link, as I mentioned. I think that's it. So those are all the components of the front suspension. Okay. Thank you. Good job, Les.
Yeah.
All right, guys, just a quick look at the passenger side, and really it's the same process as we just did on the driver's side. I don't think I'm going to bother filming taking this side apart. It's just we've already done it on the other side, so there's no sense really going and doing it on this side. So basically, Les is going to attempt to do this on his own. So from step number 1 through the whole process, I'll be here supervising, but we'll see how Les does and see what he learned from doing the other side. Right? You can tell me how wonderful a teacher I am. All right, we'll be back in a little bit. All right, we've got the passenger side suspension off now. Les has done a good job on that and got that off completely on his own. So we're going to probably do the last thing of the day, which is removing the steering rack. So Les is going to get on his back again. There's access points in the frame to remove the little steering rack mounts, which are here. I don't know if you can see that. Here are the mounts, and there are 2 bolts that are holding that rack to the frame. So we'll just get up under there, use the access points, and remove the steering rack. That'll be the last thing we do for today. I'll come back with one more update. There you go.
Little bit of man.
There we go. All right.
Sorry, Dave.
One steering rack. Done.
Wow.
All right. So it's looking pretty bare now. Come back with one last update before we go. All right, guys, just coming up to 6:30 and last update for the evening. So didn't quite get everything done that we wanted to today, but again, we're not hitting it that hard. We probably didn't start on this till around 2:30 or so, and it was more of a teaching session than anything. Les pretty much I showed him how to do the driver's side of the suspension, and Les pretty much took the passenger side of the suspension apart piece by piece as he was taught. So that was good. It was a good educational experience. And sometimes that takes a little bit longer. So anyway, we're going in the right direction. We're getting pretty close to having this stripped down completely. Not much left to go. When we come back, we'll probably remove the transmission first, then remove the engine. After we remove the chassis cross tube. Still haven't got that radiator protection shield off, but we'll get it off eventually, I promise. And then there's some brake lines and fuel lines and emissions lines that need to be removed from the inside of the chassis that run along this chassis rail. And a few brake lines, obviously clutch slave, that kind of thing, etc. need to be removed. So we're getting there. So one more day and I think we'll have it. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll try to get back out here when we can. Have a good night.